Has Sean O'Malley been exposed, or is Merab Dvalishvili really that good after his dominant victory at UFC 306? Welcome back to the channel, guys. We're going to do another episode of 5 Things I Learned, this time looking at the fight between Merab Dvalishvili and Sean O'Malley. So as always, we start with these 5 blank boxes, and as we go through the video, we reveal one thing at a time about what we learnt during this fight. When this fight was first made, I remember Merab being the favourite. However, as it got closer, a lot of MMA pundits weighed in. Sean O'Malley was the favourite at the opening bell. People had looked at Merab's chin against Marlon Moraes and Henry Cejudo and just thought that a sniper like Sean O'Malley would be able to stop him. But that just didn't happen. Merab won 49-46 on one of the scorecards and 48-47 on the other two. Anyway, let's get straight into it. Here's the first thing we learnt about this fight. Firstly, and this became obvious towards the end of the first round, Sean O'Malley's takedown defence just is not at an elite standard. Look, I think the Aljamain Sterling fight maybe gave us a false sense of confidence because he did get taken down a lot in the Peter Yan fight. But in the Sterling fight, Sterling just didn't really get going. He seemed quite tentative about closing the distance, and this led people to think that, you know what, Sean O'Malley's defence must have improved a lot since the Yan fight, as Sterling can't take him down. However, all that went out the window for this fight. The first 3.5-4 minutes, Merab wasn't really shooting for the takedown, but once he started shooting it, he got it over and over again. And not only did this wear on the gas tank of O'Malley, it completely reduced his striking output. Sean O'Malley only threw 47 strikes during this entire fight. When you think that he threw over 200 strikes against Chito Vera, it just goes to show how nullified his offense was because of the takedown threat. This is just such a glaring weakness at the top of the division. And when you've got contenders like Umar Nurmagomedov, he must have been watching this fight, licking his lips. If he's in a #1 contender fight against O'Malley, you can just see rinse and repeat. It's going to be the same thing. And apart from coming on strong in the 5th round and a couple of moments in rounds 3 and 4, O'Malley just didn't really throw anything with any conviction. Merab wasn't wobbled at any point like we saw against Moraes, like we saw against Cejudo. It's crazy to think that Cejudo hurt Merab more than Sean O'Malley did. That just wasn't what people are expecting. And it's something that we learned from this fight, is that Sean O'Malley's takedown defence really exposes him in so many areas. It completely reduces his output, and it'll give hope to a lot of contenders in the bantamweight division that they can take a good scalp in O'Malley. But we can't just talk about O'Malley, we need to look at the new champion, Merab Dvalishvili, and he is such a deserving champion. One thing that we learnt is that him and his team can come up with a game plan and they can execute it. His lateral moving during this fight was incredible. The fact that he could keep going for 5 rounds, and it's such an obvious answer to Sean O'Malley's best attributes. Sean O'Malley is a pure sniper. If you stand still in front of him, he will hurt you. We've seen this time and time again. Eddie Wineland, Aljamain Sterling, Chito, even though he didn't stop Chito, who just has a ridiculous chin, whenever Chito stood still, he'd just get sniped. Merab and his team had clearly identified this, and he does a lot of lateral movement anyway, but it was on another level in this fight. He was constantly moving to the side, staying out of distance from the strikes, and then rushing in and closing distance when he felt like a takedown was on. It was an excellent game plan, and he was thoroughly deserving of this victory. Whether you like the style or not, you have to respect it. And not only this, his control was really nice. We saw in the fight between Sean O'Malley and Peter Yan that Sean O'Malley would hand fight really well, get 2-on-1, and then because of his reach, because of how tall he is, he'd stand up and he'd have the automatic height advantage against his opponent. Merab just didn't allow this. He kept stuffing Sean's head, keeping his head higher than Sean's and his hips on top of Sean's. That's a really important factor, because if your hips and your head are higher than your opponent's, it's so difficult for them to stand up. Whilst I'd like to have seen a bit more attacking threat, both in terms of the striking ground and pound and the submission threats, Merab's control on the ground was really impressive. Once he gets his arms locked around you, it's so difficult to escape. And you could see that Sean O'Malley had that 1,000-yard stare that we did used to see in opponents with Khabib. Look, his ground and pound is nowhere near on the level of Khabib's, but his control is excellent. So in this fight we learned that Merab is very good at executing a game plan, and in a division like the bantamweight division where there are so many exciting stylistic matchups, this is a really good skill to have. Anyway, let's move on. And one other thing we learnt during this fight was the different ways in which referees can get involved in a fight. Look, this might not be looking at the direct action, but it's definitely looking at an aspect of the fight which has some involvement, and that is Herb Dean's interference with the fight. It started within a matter of seconds. Merab and Tim Welch going at each other. I'd never seen anything like that before. Herb Dean interrupted because Merab was shouting at Tim Welch, or vice versa, and action was actually paused for a few seconds. Not only this, we saw Herb Dean having to get involved with inside glove grabs, which was actually a positive involvement from him, but also, I didn't know this, I don't know if you knew this, but apparently kissing is against the rules because Merab had Sean O'Malley down and he was doing a sort of mocking kiss to his back, the back of his head, and Herb Dean broke up the action. This could have been really costly because I think Merab maybe thought it was the end of the round, but O'Malley stood up and followed up with a couple of legal shots afterwards. So whilst this involvement from Herb Dean is either positive, as in the inside glove grab, or kind of funny like the kissing or back and forth with the opponent's corner, one involvement that wasn't great was his insistence that Merab be more active when he was on top in dominant positions. And by Merab's standards, I think he was being very active. This kind of involvement from a referee is very dangerous, especially as we mentioned, if you have a solid game plan and the referee's trying to interfere with your game plan or interfere with your style of fighting when it's not actually going against the rules. This is a really unfair advantage to Sean O'Malley against Merab Dvalishvili. I think the commentary team agreed with me. In the 5th round, they were definitely saying that Herb Dean shouldn't be getting involved and that if O'Malley wants to get back to his feet, he needs to stand up. He needs to find a way to get Merab off him, get this Georgian blanket off him, and get back up to his feet. So Herb Dean, not a great performance by you, pretty disappointed. Look, maybe the occasion got to him, but for a guy who's refereed so many fights, it was disappointing to see. So that's 3 things we've learnt so far. Firstly, Sean O'Malley's takedown defence leaves a lot to be desired. It also exposes weaknesses in his striking game. Secondly, Merab is a very deserving champion and his game plan was excellent. And thirdly, Herb Dean's involvement could have ruined the fight, let's face it. He was far too involved. Some of it was quite funny, but some of it could have had serious consequences for the outcome of the fight. Before I get into number 4, guys, I hope you're enjoying this video. Make sure you do subscribe to my channel, drop it a like, and let me know what you learnt during this fight. Anyway, let's move on. Number 4. And I want to word this, I had to think about this before, I'm going to be careful with the wording. It's the weakness of each fighter's strength. So in this fight, we learnt about the weaknesses of each fighter's strength. Let me explain what I mean. So Sean O'Malley's strength is his striking, and we learnt that the weakness of his striking is when he's put on the back foot. And funnily enough, in the last 2 months, we've seen 3 title fights in which the supposed better striker has been defeated by a pressure fighter. So Sean O'Malley has shown in this fight that he struggles dealing with pressure fighters as an all-out striker. And the same can be said for Israel Adesanya and Leon Edwards. So maybe one thing we learnt in this fight is that strikers in MMA need to evolve their game. They need to work more on striking on the back foot, because it's all well and good when it's going their way, or even if they're countering at angles when it's just a back and forth striking match. However, when you're against a pressure fighter, someone who's going to wrestle, push you against the cage, something needs to change with the striking. And this could be one of those moments in MMA where we do see some kind of development. There is some kind of evolution in a striker's game, where they work out where they should be aiming their strikes, what strikes they should be looking for when faced with a pressure fighter. And the other side of this coin is the weakness of Merab's strength, which Merab's strength is his wrestling, but his weakness is his finishing ability from both strikes and submissions. Like I said before, I think his control's really nice in this fight, but I'd really like to see him grow his game to another level where he is a finishing threat. Because at the moment, look, the pace he puts on stuff for an MMA purist, it's impressive to watch. You notice I didn't use the word exciting. It is impressive to watch. When you don't have the finishing ability, you don't provide those moments. You might provide great fights, but you don't provide those moments, those finishes which people remember for years to come. That's just the way it is. So the fourth thing we learned in this fight is more about the weakness of each fighter's strength, and the fact that both of these fighters need to work on these to either A, secure another title shot, or B, have more of a legacy within the sport. Finally, the 5th thing that we learnt in this fight, that's quite difficult to say, 5th thing that we learnt in this fight, is that Umar Nurmagomedov is probably going to be next. Let's face it, we saw him in the crowd at the end. Joe Rogan asked him a question about Umar that he didn't really address it, did he? And he's been quite dismissive of Umar so far, which is understandable because Umar's only ranked win is against Corey Sandhagen. But the bantamweight division at the moment is kind of a bit of a mess with a lot of the top 10 fighters coming off losses. So Umar could well be the next guy. Let me know if you think he's deserving of that fight, but I think we did learn that he's probably next in line for it. From a stylistic perspective, it could be an interesting matchup. We normally do see good fights when wrestlers go against wrestlers, but you could argue Davison Figueiredo is also deserving of a title shot. He's always in exciting fights, but he did get out-grappled in the rematch with Brandon Moreno, so who knows if his grappling could compete with Merab's, but I'd be interested to see either of those matchups. Like I said, I do think it's going to be Umar that we do see next. So these are 5 things that we learnt from Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili at UFC 306. Let me know if you learnt anything else, and like I said, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, and I'll see you for the next video.